Hello, everybody. Thanks to everyone who is joining us. We're broadcasting live. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, and I will be going over Microsoft Cloud Identity Protection and Breach Prevention. Today's webinar will be around 20 slides I have in PowerPoint, and I will also switch the screen to show you some of the hands-on configurations in Azure Entra ID and Office 365. I'll try to keep it to just over an hour. If you have questions, please put them in Q&A or put them in the chat, and I will get to your questions in the end. If you'd like to interrupt and ask a question about a slide or something that I'm presenting, please raise your hand. If you're in a Teams meeting and if you are in the live chat, please put your question in the chat. So here we go. I will be sharing my screen now. So today I will be going over multi-factor authentication and securing the logon process, conditional access policies in Entra ID, authentication strength to pick the right balance between authentication strength, authentication requirements, and relaxed security, identity protection, using machine learning to detect and deter suspicious account activities. I'll go over smart lockout and password protection in Entra ID, privileged identity management. That's the Microsoft version of PAM, privileged access. Microsoft 365 and Office 365 configuration baselines. And I will talk a bit about Azure Sentinel because it plays in with all the detection and threat policies to help centralize review and remediation. So why this subject and why I am going over this? 81% of breaches are due to weak or reused or stolen passwords. So passwords are still used in majority of logins. Microsoft is pushing passwordless authentication and PIN authentication, but most organizations still use passwords. 62% of breaches involve stolen credentials, brute force, or phishing attacks, and 45% of users mix their personal passwords and their work account passwords. So if you have a large work from home worker base and their accounts get leaked, they're already more prone to attacks than those who are in a centralized location, just because of the nature of their connection and location. And if their password gets leaked from 23andMe or Yahoo or any of the tens of dozens of websites that they use, there's a 45% chance that they're also using that password for work. So it's good to know when those breaches of those platforms occur, so you can have your users reset their password at work, and there is a way to do that. 68% of tenants on Azure and Office 365 operate with default security configuration, and we know that because this is information that Microsoft provides. So there are some settings that have never been reviewed, and that puts those tenants at risk. So what's identity protection and breach prevention? It's a collection of measures and strategies you can implement to protect against unauthorized access to sensitive identity-related information. And that includes user credentials, personal data, customer data, authentication tokens, proprietary and confidential information. Those are the types of data and types of information that are most sensitive and should be most guarded in any organization. And this is important because identity breaches can have severe consequences, including data theft and reputation damage, financial loss, legal fines, regulatory penalties. So identity and breach prevention aims to mitigate those risks by implementing techniques to safeguard those identity-related assets and implement security controls to prevent unauthorized access. It seems that every day I hear about some new organization, company, business, government, or nonprofit org breached, or there is a new lawsuit or a new settlement. I get those notifications daily. That information always leaks out, and it's mostly due to factors like weak passwords, phishing attacks, brute force attacks on credentials or credential staffing, insider threats, authentication token theft, or some vulnerability in the identity or access management system. So this is the source of the breaches. This is how breaches happen. So here are the stats for 2023 data breach report. Some of the interesting data here is that there were 1,400 public data breach notices. So when a company loses sensitive information, a breach occurs, they have 30 days to notify the public. There were 3,200 plus compromises. It's an increase of 72% in comparison to 2021. And the types of businesses that are impacted, healthcare is on top, financial services, professional services, manufacturing, education. Biggest breaches are from T-Mobile, Xfinity, People Connect, Nation Star Mortgage, PBI Research. So there are medium and small sized businesses on that list. If small business owners don't believe that they can be impacted by a data breach, that's wrong. You just don't hear about it that often. And the total number of victims is over 353 million. So these are the stats on the scale of the breaches. So some interesting statistics is the time it takes to identify that a breach has occurred. And that's 287 days. And the reasoning is that in many cases, organizations don't know that they have been breached until their data is found somewhere on the dark web, because there isn't enough or sufficient monitoring in place to identify that some information has been leaked. And in some cases, it's organizations that are trying to hide the fact that they have been breached or some data has been leaked, not to spook their customers. But the regulators are coming down pretty heavily on that. So it also often happens that if a bad actor breaches a computer system, they don't want to be noticed for as long as possible, because they want to exploit and see what data they can get their hands on, or how they can take over the organization. So they will lurk in the systems, use credentials that they have, try to exploit additional credentials, see what data or applications they have access to, and try to gain access to more data and more applications. So bad actors are trying to stay on the down low for as long as possible to see how much they can exploit. But once the breach is identified, the notification requirement in the United States is 30 days. So the organizations that have breaches, they have to notify their customers in 30 days. And if they are a public company or they're under some compliance guidelines, most likely have 3 days to alert government organizations that oversee their compliance. So in Entra ID and Azure, these are key components of identity protection. It's authentication, authorization, encryption, privileged access management, monitoring and auditing, user education and awareness. So these capabilities are present in Entra ID, and they are an industry standard to mitigate breaches and to prevent breaches. So for each one of these, I will talk today about a Microsoft product, the capability that will cover one of the 6 disciplines for industry standard breach detection and mitigation. First, to multi-factor authentication and conditional access policies. So multi-factor authentication is available as part of Authentication Strength. The second factor is something that you have. So for MFA, it's typically something that you know, like your password, and something that you have, such as your authenticator app, code, or a prompt from authenticator app, and a confirmation from your mobile device. So it's an additional layer of security to your password. So in order to log in and authenticate, the user has to have something and know something. So multi-factor authentication is something that you have. And then conditional access policy is a policy that defines a set of conditions that a user must meet before they can access protected resources. So for example, they have to be in a specific location or outside of a specific location, plus have a certain authentication strength like MFA, and they have to have a health device so that you can use device health attestation. So you can use a combination of conditions to allow access to a specific resource or app. So how does that work? If you go to portal.azure.com and then enter ID, and you scroll down to security, you'll have conditional access here. So you can see the policies that you have in place here. This is my demo tenant. I have a couple of policies for user risk activity, for example. But you can create a new policy, and you can set it to any list of conditions that you like. So you can assign some users or all users. You can also exclude users, and you can specify a resource. It's some user action or it's a cloud app that they get access to. There is a way to select an app from a list. For example, if you want to restrict admin portal access to a certain authentication strength, or you have a published application that you want to make it more difficult or set a list of requirements and conditions for a user to access, you can do that here. But for now, I'll just say all cloud apps, and you can also specify network. So you can include a network or exclude a network. For example, if somebody is trying to connect from you want any untrusted network. So it's going to be all networks, and you're going to exclude all trusted networks. And then you'll set an authentication method or authentication flow in that policy. For example, grant access if they have multi-factor authentication. I'm going to exclude myself. So with this specific policy, what I'm doing is I'm saying if a user is accessing any cloud location, any cloud application or connected app outside of the trusted network, then they must provide multi-factor authentication. But this is just an example. I can also say that they must provide an authentication strength. So I can grant them access and require authentication strength. And then in authentication strength here, I can say they have to have passwordless MFA, such as Microsoft Authenticator, or I can say they must provide a password plus SMS, and it has to be a hybrid join device. So their device must be hybrid join, so it has to be a company device or device that's registered, and they must provide strong authentication. And only in that condition they can be granted access. So and if I save this, I can save it in the report only, so that the policy will not be enforced, but the user, once they perform their activity, they try to log on, this policy will be logged, and then I can go here into audit log, and I can see in audit log that policy was triggered, and I can see if it's actually doing what I wanted to do or not. So if you want to make access conditional based on a set of authentication strength or device that the users are connecting from, this is what conditional access is for. And then multi-factor authentication is part of that. It's been moved to authentication methods. Here it's in authentication strength. So this is an authentication strength policy. Like there are some that are built in, like this one is in multi-factor authentication, but I also have one called strength factor 2. So for this one, password. It's a custom one that I've made. This one requires a password plus authenticator push notification. So, and then I can assign this authentication strength to a set of users, or assign it to all users and exclude specific users. Typically, what I see is there's a group, everyone, and then there are executives and IT. And executives and IT can have special treatment if they have access to more secretive or more complex information, I should say, like proprietary confidential information, customer information, then you may want to make their access more strict. So require a specific authentication strength, like a password plus notification push plus SMS or email. So it also has to do with your company culture. You need to be able to find the right middle between making the policies too relaxed and too complex, where the users don't complain too much, but at the same time, you can explain to them that it's to secure company data, company information. So that's multi-factor authentication and authentication strength. There's also per user MFA, where you can assign users specifically to have MFA enforced, and that's here. If you go to users in Entra ID, there's a per user MFA tab here where you can see where it's enabled, where it's enforced. So this one shows everything as disabled because I'm doing it through conditional access policies, but you could go through per user assignment as well. So let's jump back. Let's see. Any questions so far? Let me look at the meeting stats. Okay, no questions so far. So I just spoke about and showed authentication strength. So those are settings for a level of security provided by authentication mechanisms used to verify identity of users accessing resources. So it could be a combination of authentication methods that are required for a specific level of access. You could have lower access requirements with just password and MFA to access Office 365. But if somebody wants to access, let's say, Microsoft Dynamics, which is a connected app, you can require password plus MFA plus a company-owned device or verification via their email. So you can choose what works better for you. Identity protection is a feature of Entra ID that uses machine learning algorithm to detect suspicious activities. And that could be brute force attacks, new locations, risky locations, risky known IP addresses, a combination of suspicious activity from a user. And this is determined by Microsoft algorithms. They look at the logon and they can determine if it's a risky logon or a user account is at risk. So this identity protection is configured in Entra ID. It's, if you go to Enter ID security, and then identity protection. So you can see there are policies here, protection policies, conditional access, which we looked at, and then you have user risk policy, and this is configurable. So you can choose what users are affected by this policy, and you can use the risk level, low, medium, high. So it's what the algorithm thinks the risk is. So if a user, for example, enters wrong password once, it's low, twice it's medium, but if they were logging in from Boston, Massachusetts in the morning, but then in the afternoon they're logging in from Bangladesh or trying to, and they're entering in their password wrong, or let's say they're entering their password right, even then that becomes a high risk. So with a high risk, you trigger that policy, and you can either block access or allow access and require user to change that password. Then for sign-in risk policy, it's during the logon process, you can have also block access for a certain level, low and above, high, medium, low. This one is set to low. So anything for low and above will trigger it, and it will require user authentication. So this often happens if a user was connecting to a portal and then they jumped on a VPN to download a movie from China, then their access location has changed, and this will set off risk signing when their browser is attempting to resubmit their token, and will kick off the trigger for this policy. And in my configuration, they will be required to provide multi-factor authentication. So this can be for an existing session, and the session will last, the sign-in session will last for the duration of the time limit for the session. So that would be whatever you set it to. So that's what identity protection does. And then you can go to reports and you can look at who the risky users were. For example, here, this user was logging on at they were at risk. You also get an alert with this. There's an alerting setting, who gets the alert and for what level of risk, and then you can see what happened with that user. So if you go to like risk history, they were at risk. It was due to unfamiliar sign-in properties, and you can confirm that it's safe. Sometimes organizations will reach out to a user. Like here in the risky users, for example, if you're blocking access here for risky sign-in, then you want to receive that alert quickly, and you want the help desk to contact that user instead of the user calling the help desk to let them know that they can't log in. So some organizations do that, and they're proactively contacting users and asking, hey, did you travel to Bangladesh, or did you try changing your password on an unknown device? So whatever that caused that condition. And then you can see the risky sign-ins here also in the risky sign-ins report. Eventually. So that's identity protection. So to summarize, user at risk represents the ability to identify that a given account was compromised. Sign-in risk represents a probability that a given authentication request isn't authorized by the identity owner. And common causes are potential leaked credentials, sign-ins from anonymous IP addresses, impossible travel or atypical locations, sign-in from known infected devices or known IPs with suspicious activity, brute force or credential stuffing. So if a user account is attempted several times before the account is locked out, there will be a warning, depending on how many account lockouts attempts need to occur before the account is locked out by smart lockout, which is another feature. So reuse of expired authentication tokens, and that happens if you log in on one computer in the morning, you are within the session window, then you go to a different computer, log in, get a different authentication token, then you come back to the first one and you try to reuse that token, that will trigger expired authentication token or authentication token that's been superseded. Authentication tokens with missing information, and all of these can cause the sign-in risk or user at risk policy to trigger and perform an action, remediation action that could be reprompt for MFA, lock out the user account or block access, require user to change their password. So the reason why that there's a lot of flexibility in both detection, risk levels, and auto remediation is because different customers have different nature of business and different company culture. So in some organizations, you have users who work remotely a lot and travel a lot, and you also have some executives that we call untouchables. If you lock out their account while they're trying to do some work, you may be in trouble. So you want to maybe set a different risk level for executives than for regular users. Or that may be the opposite. You may be a bank where there are some very high brass bank officers who have access to very sophisticated proprietary or complex customer information, financial information, and you want to have the policy trigger at a lower stage, and it's accepted that you may need more oversight of access with those accounts. So depending on your specific situation and your company culture and organization and information sensitivity, you may need or want to change those policies. So there's a lot of flexibility, but based on your company culture and your organization, we can make recommendations how to configure the identity protection policies. So this is a typical user risk, sign-in risk process flow that I would recommend. So for sign-in risk, if a policy has been triggered with a level low and above, prompt the user to re-authenticate with MFA. Their old token will be revoked, a new token will be issued with a new MFA, and then the user will be allowed to sign in. For medium and above, user risk, I would create an exclusion group and create a conditional access bypass policy for executives so that you're not blocking their access and you're not annoying them, But if the policy get triggered, raise an incident and have a member of the IT security team review the incident and why it's been triggered. If it's something severe, like they had a successful sign-in from Bangladesh or Nigeria while you know that they're in New York City, then you can manually revoke all their sessions, call them and let them know that their account has been compromised, or require them to change password at next login. So, and in many situations and many organizations want to have that white glove treatment group of executives because they want to preserve their data and because they want to provide white glove treatment. So that's your exclusion group. And if they're not in the exclusion group, then have the user risk policy, when triggered at a level medium and above, trigger a conditional access policy that will block sign-in, and alert will be sent to admins, but the account will be blocked until the user is verified. So you could have something like this, where depending on level of threat and who the user is, you can have a different auto remediation action. And I can help you come up with some scenarios for that. Password protection and smart lockout. Password protection policies are policies that help prevent from using weak or commonly reused passwords. There's also a password block list in Azure AD and on-prem AD where you can block users from using specific passwords like password !123 or anything that could be well known within your organization. So there's also a utility that we can use which will search your company's website for most commonly used words or names and give us that list so we can put that in the password block list. So there's a global block list and there is also a custom block list of passwords to block. So you can customize it, but there are some that are built in by Microsoft. So there is an agent that you can install on domain controllers to maintain that same list. And that's helpful because there are a lot of passwords that will pass the Microsoft Azure AD complexity requirement, but at the same time will be too easy to guess. So if you have a hybrid Active Directory Entra ID, then on the on-prem side, you can set complexity, but on the Azure AD/Entra ID side, when the password is set on the cloud side, you cannot specify the complexity of the password. That's something that Microsoft does. So, and they control it. So it's helpful to have a password blacklist. And then the smart lockout protects against brute force attack by locking an account after a certain number of unsuccessful attempts. And that is something that's customizable. Let's see where it is. It's an Entra ID security. It's in the Authentication Strength, I think. Authentication method. So here, password protection. So For smart lockout, you can set the threshold for how long to lock out the account for. And this one is set to 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes. Banned password list, you would enter them here. And you can also use this on prem. So you can enforce or audit. Audit would audit either the password creation or lockout in the audit log, but I want to enforce this so that the smart lockout actually locks out the accounts. So if you have risky sign-in and user at risk, they will probably get flagged before those 5 attempts are reached. But you want to have this setting on because if you don't, then you're more susceptible to brute force or a password spray. So if a bad actor sprays a bunch of passwords at a credential, if you don't have this turned on, then they can password spray them indefinitely until the user at risk policy is enabled. So this is one of the settings to check. And then you have SSPR, which is self-service password reset, which is more of customer service feature than security, because if the user has to call in to change their password, if they can't do it through self-service, then you're getting many more help desk phone calls and then you need to, and then that can become a security threat if there's a weak user behavior engineering setup. You have to then verify if it's the real user who is calling to reset their password, and it just becomes more difficult. So there is a feature that will allow users to reset their password themselves if they provide a secondary authentication method when they register for the service. So it's something that you enable, then the user registers, they register their secondary authentication method if they don't have it already, and then they can reset their own password. So if a user has an admin role, then they always have self-service password reset. They have to register for it in order to start using their role. And then there are still accounts that have their password set to never expire for one reason or another. And this can be done on the on-prem side and on the Azure AD Entra side, on the cloud side. And if you have a hybrid setup, especially with password write-back, this can become complicated because depending on where the password was changed, it can be written back. And if it's set to expire in one place but not the other, for example, if it's set to expire in on-prem but not in Azure AD, then they will only be prompted to change when they log on to the side of the hybrid AD where the account is set to expire password. So if you're running into those problems with inconsistent policies between on-prem and in the cloud, I have another webinar and video where I go over those scenarios and how to fix them. And if you have those issues, feel free to reach out and I'll help you fix that. But it is or can be a bit complicated, and there are known issues with compatibility of different policies. So there's also a compatibility, integration compatibility capability for Windows Hello and device health validation for password protection. So, and this plays into conditional policies. You can have device health attestation where somebody logs in from a device that's either hybrid joined or Azure AD /Entra joined, and they're marked as healthy, then the password that you entered can be validated. Or you could also have it so that the user can only change their password from that healthy device. So there is a capability to set a combination of conditions for password change or password protection. Okay, let me see. Any questions so far? Okay. Next, privileged identity management. That's the Microsoft or one of the Microsoft products for PAM, privileged access management, and it's certainly the one that's built for the cloud. So for Entra ID /Azure ID /Office 365. And what PIM does is it helps manage, control, and monitor access to credentials in Azure AD /Entra for identities that have privileged role access, custom role access, and access to resources. And it provides for just-in-time privilege access, assignment of privileged roles and resources, and monitoring. So what does that mean? PIM can help you to manage and monitor privileged access. So who gets what privileged role, who approves this privileged role assignment, when his role is activated, just-in-time activation for the role, activation for role-based access control, limiting the scope of access reviews, out of scope assignments. So it's a feature-rich product, but I'm sure that many of you have been in a situation where somebody has a global admin role, but they're an admin, a developer calls them and says, hey, Jack, I need to test something in Azure AD or Office 365, and for that, I need a global admin role. Can you please give it to me? So Jack goes in and he assigns the developer a global admin or another privileged role. And from that point on, they just have it. They don't remember why or how it was assigned or how long it was assigned for or that it has been assigned. So this would be an out-of-band assignment. And if you have enrolled into PIM, you would be alerted on that, right? So what does PIM look like? So this is in security. Identity governance is where they moved it now. So here you have Entra ID roles. So you can add assignment to a user. Let's say I want to provide Tom Hill with application administrator. And then I have settings here. They can be either active or eligible. If I mark them as active, I need to provide justification right now I have marked permanently, but let's say I have somebody coming in to work on a project and I need to grant them assignment for a period of, let's say, 6 months. So I could do that. I could grab a permanently active assignment, or let's say an active assignment that's continuously active for 6 months. So I would do it this way. If I want to do it via eligibility, then I can make them eligible for 6 months. So I will assign, and then when they need to actually use their role, let's say they log in the morning, they drink their coffee, do some non-admin work, and then they want to activate their role. So I don't have an eligible assignment. Let's create one for me. Gotta wait for a role. So I'm going to be eligible for application administrator. I'm going to make it permanent. So now in eligible roles, I have application administrator, but there's an activate here. So I am eligible to have that role, but I'm not active because I have to activate it just in time. So I have to go here and click activate. And right now I have duration set to 8 hours. I can also customize it to make it less. We can also manage that by policy. So for example, I can go to settings for a role and I can add a maximum duration. Right now it's set to 8 hours. I can make it 4 hours. And I can require an MFA, Azure MFA, or authentication context. I can require justification for activation or none. I can also have an approval for activation or none. So this is customizable, but the benefit is that it's all audited and logged. We know who requested what role, who approved it, when it was granted for eligibility, when it was granted for activation. So it gives you a huge benefit, because let's say you're on vacation and you're a global admin and your role is always activated. You may be logging in or not during your span of vacation, but somebody could be trying to hack into your account. So if your role is activated, then there's a notification of that. And if you have your out of office set, we can get an alert that John has global admin, he is out of office, but somebody just activated their role. So that's a possibility. So it's just-in-time activation and control, and I could do a whole webinar just on PIM, which I probably will. But this is just to give you kind of a flavor of why PIM is important, especially if you have multiple roles in your organization and multiple identities that have those roles. Yeah, let's see. Any questions so far? Nothing in the chat. Okay. Security configuration baseline. So depending on when you acquired your tenant, your Azure slash Entra ID slash Office 365 before it became Microsoft 365, and then still not in all cases. In some cases, it's still called Office 365, or it may have been BPOS, Business Online Productivity Suite, which is what Office 365 was called before. It was Office 365. So depending on when you acquired your tenant, you could have various settings that are different from somebody who is acquiring their tenant now. And this is because over time, Microsoft learned risks with specific settings, or there were new features added. So when we do compliance work on the tenant and we scan basically everything, every single setting that's available in Office 365 slash Entra ID, there are over 3,000 settings, right? So there's a setting to feature comparison, which means if I click on this hover button or twist this cog, the user will no longer be able to do X, but a bad actor may be able to do Y, and the outcome is Z, right? So this is the feature to risk comparison. So there are over 3,000 of those features, configuration items that result in either feature availability or feature non-availability. But there are a few dozen kind of on top settings that are security baseline configuration, most commonly misconfigured settings, and those control session timeout, legacy protocol use such as legacy SMTP for authentication, cross-tenant access, non-admin user capabilities like invite guests or create new tenants or create new subscription, non-admin capabilities, SSPR settings, self-service password reset, mobile device policies, messaging connection encryption, and then you go into the world of SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, content sharing, and content permissions. So those have a number of settings: password lockout, expirations, data access requests. So among the 3,000 configuration items, there are a few dozen on top that are most commonly misconfigured, and those are called the tenant security configuration baseline. So if you reach out to me, I can tell you what they are. I've listed some of the commonly misconfigured or forgotten settings here. But to secure your tenant, if you're going on a campaign of tightening security in your Office 365 or M365 or Azure tenant, those are settings that you may want to look at, because those are most commonly forgotten or misconfigured. And we do offer configuration assessments, which cover most of those or all of those, but there are also just a few quick ones that you can check. For example, like session limits and keep alive, right? So depending on what licensing you have, the session timeout for your browser sessions to Office 365 will be different. And they can be set in SharePoint, they can be set in Entra ID, they can be set in conditional access. So that's something, that's one most obvious. I'm accessing Office 365 from the airport kiosk, and I forgot to log out, and now Joe from Florida, who's late for his flight, is bored, and he can go to your session and look at cool stuff you have in Word Online or in your email, right? So that's one of the most basic ones. So that's something that should be checked for on every tenant. And then Azure Sentinel, it's going just a couple years back. It's a Microsoft SIEM and SOAR solution that offers real-time monitoring and alerting, incident management, suspicious activity behavior, threat hunting. Why is this included in breach prevention mitigation? Due to monitoring. So if you have a number of products enabled and configured, let's say you have identity protection with risky logon and risk detection, you have PIM, privileged identity management, you have threat detection. All of those products, they generate alerts. And the more users you have and the more footprint you have in the cloud, the more alerts will be triggered. And then if you add to that device monitoring with endpoint security, those have more alerts and more events. Excuse me. So Azure Sentinel can help you create a single pane of glass for monitoring those alerts and detecting activities, detecting policy violations in real time. And it will allow you to promptly respond and gives you intelligence for threat detection and investigation and response. So in the threat detection realm, all the connected apps, they put their SIEM logs, their access logs into log analytics. And information as to the threats also goes into log analytics. So Sentinel reads the log analytics logs in real time or near real time, as Microsoft calls it, and monitors those logs for anomalies, malicious behavior, certain patterns, and creates incidents for those threats. And you can go to the incidents pane and configure how you want those incidents to be handled. And then there's an automated incident response through playbooks and automations. You can create workflows to automate some of governance actions. If A happens, do B. Send this person an alert or raise an incident with a specific team for review or block access or encrypt a file. So there's some automated incident response and mitigation. And then you can also customize rules and queries where you can create custom queries for events that can happen based on your in-house built applications, specific threats that you may be facing due to the type of business that you have, custom analytics that you have written in Custo, which is the Sentinel language or what have you. So there's a lot of customization available with Sentinel for breach detection and automated response. So the Sentinel can also monitor your on-prem devices and on-prem services like Active Directory. You can install on the agent on servers. You can monitor connected applications. There are packages that you can install to connect third-party cloud applications to monitor those. You can get information and detections on devices. So because there are so many different places that can send your alert and where breach risks can happen and breach events can happen, it makes sense to have a single platform where all those events can send their alerts and report their risks. And Sentinel is that platform. So to summarize, you want to give your users a secure access, but also adaptive access, where mitigating controls can be flexible in order to address the risks based on the risk severity, but do so without compromising the user experience. If the mitigating controls and risk mitigation activities will be too burdensome for the user, where they can't run the business, then they might stop paying the bills. You know, if it's executives or top level board members of your company, they need to be able to do their work. But at the same time, you want to keep their data safe. So secure and adaptive access is about keeping that balance. Seamless user experience. So you want to provide enough monitoring and enforce strong authentication practices, but also do so without compromising user experience. So user experience is important. If users complain about their experience, no matter how secure it is, it will probably be damaging to you as a security organization, because that balance is not properly kept. And then unified identity management is important because there are so many connected apps and so many cloud apps and on-premise apps, especially if you're running in a hybrid environment. You want a single place to manage your identities, manage their access, and you can probably tell Microsoft is trying to get away from the hybrid platforms with on-prem Active Directory, but I think it will be a few years before that happens. So you also want to encapsulate on-premise access to be secure and have visibility and control of both on-premise workloads and Azure and Office 365 workloads. So yeah, that's summarizes it. Now let questions. Let me see what's in the live chat, if I have anybody in the live chat who sending us questions from the stream. Okay. Connection. What's the connection with Defender for Cloud Apps? So the question is about Defender for Cloud Apps connection with Entra ID and user risk. So there is a connection because it is a connected app, but that's going to depend on what policies you have set. Let me just go there real quick. So if you go to compliance, in the compliance portal, nope, sorry, wrong portal, security. I said security, I was typing compliance, that happens. So if you go to cloud apps and then policies, policy management. So there are some policies that will overlap between, for example, the user risk and risky logon. Some of those will overlap with the ones that are in Defender for Cloud Apps. For example, like here, logon from a risky IP address. This will overlap with the risky sign-on, right? But both will show up. But what you want to decide is where you will take action, because you probably don't want to receive alerts from both. And then if you have Sentinel, you don't want to receive alerts from that one. So you want to, for the types of risks that you're running, you want to figure out where you're going to have your alerts be triggered from. And then the other item to keep in mind, so like here, you have governance actions. So for example, from Defender for Cloud Apps, you can choose between these governance actions, and you can see that they're similar to what you have in risky users. But in some of the policies, you can create a playbook in Power Automate, so you can have some type of automation. And then if you go the automation route for this specific risk, then you want to turn off the user at risk policy in the identity management. But you could also manage what apps this works all. So like you have all apps, but you could also have connected apps, which I don't have in my demo tenant, but you could have, for example, Salesforce. And if you're doing single sign-on with Salesforce and there is some risky logon detected through the Salesforce portal, maybe you want that alert to come through here. So it's going to depend on your environment, what you're using Defender for Cloud Apps for. If you have third-party connected apps, then if you do, then do you want to have those third-party connected apps show up in Defender for Cloud Apps instead of the risky sign-in? But then if it's single sign-on, it's gonna show up in both. So depending on what you're using and what you already have built out, if you already have a process built out in identity governance, then you don't really want to have that policy set up here, unless you're going to go to automation route and then you want to disable it in identity management and have the alert triggered here. So it's all about your approach. There is more than one way to manage those risky sign-ons, and Defender for Cloud Apps is one of them, especially if you want to do some automation beyond what Microsoft offers as built in. Okay, but yes, there are some additional ones. These are like built-in policies. There are some here that are similar. Like you can see this one, activity from anonymous IP address. So yes, you are right. This is the same as risky sign-in, a user at risk, but it's more detailed because it tells you here what that policy is. So it is related. They're the same policy. It is for connected apps, but it's probably not for every single connected app, right? There might be some that are not going for single sign-on, but still monitor through Defender for Cloud Apps. I'm not sure. It's going to be on case-by-case basis. As you can see, it's highly customizable. But this one also has the send alert as email, right? But you probably don't want to have both systems send your alert, because it will just bury whoever is the analyst going over those alerts. So got to be careful about those. I can probably get to like one more or two more questions. Let me see what else is there. Where to get the default settings for the configuration baseline. So in the better days when Microsoft didn't try to get money for everything, in the compliance portal, there used to be a configuration assessment that you could just run with through the compliance portal. But now here in the compliance manager, they charge you like a fee, something exorbitant, like $500 per assessment. You can have some. There are some that they'll give you, like in the compliance score here. Some most widely detected. You can see that they will spit them out here in the compliance manager. So my score is 47 for my demo tenant. And they will give me like the sections that those are in. And if you go to like view assessments, it will give you a more granular breakdown. Like in the solutions, you can go to assessments here, and at some point, you can create an assessment and you can purchase credits to run it. So depending on your licensing, it will allow you to run some, but not others. There is also Azure, what used to be called Azure Security Center before. Now it's Defender for Cloud. You have your secure score here. So you can look at some of those configuration items here in the secure score and the Defender for Cloud. And you can go through these too. And, there's some buried way here that you can actually export an Excel report if you want to. And it will give you like the most risky ones to address. And if you go to the admin portal, so in the Office 365, if you go to admin, and show all admin center, there's also settings. Dig through here, there's like an org setting here. So there are some in the security and privacy that are here, like idle session timeout is here, for example. That's one of the ones I was talking about. But if you have like a P1 or a P2 licensing with Enter ID, I would recommend setting that one, for example, through conditional access, because then you cover everything that goes through Enter ID authentication. So look through these settings. So depending on where you go to all admins, there's also, see these all admin centers, and there's a settings here. Settings, org, or profile. So look through the settings. If there's one, if you want the list, like the 3,000 list of settings, you can get it from CIS Center for Internet Security, Office 365 benchmarks. If you're into looking through a 3,000 item list, we also, how we do it is we have a PowerShell application that connects to Graph API and just pulls all the settings and looks at them and kind of gives you a report. If this is clicked to yes, then you lose this, but you gain this. So it could be there. But then in every setting here, in the settings, you can look at what specific settings for. Like I know that this one mail is going to have like the legacy, the connection profiles, DLP. So there is a tree of settings here. So you either need to look through all of them or one that you're specifically trying to turn off or block. Okay, we're gonna do one last question and then we're gonna wrap. One more question from the stream chat. I got one on external sharing, I got one on passwords in a hybrid environment. Okay, so how to set the password complexity to match on-prem. So password complexity, yeah, you were asking about the settings that I was showing in the in Enter ID for smart lockout, right? And why? Yeah. So depending on your licensing, you have different capabilities to turn different things on in different places. So if I was showing you looks different from what you saw in your tenant or see in your tenant now, it's because this is an E3 demo tenant, and you probably have like a business premium or something where those settings are controlled in through the Office 365 portal. So that's why you see it differently. But let me go to security. Authentication methods. So what's available and what's not available. It's just the lockout threshold and duration and whether it's enforced or not. So if for your hybrid environment, the on-prem policies will win when it comes to complexity when the user is resetting password on-prem. So if they're resetting password on-prem and you have the policy set like in the default domain policy for password complexity, the difficulty will be mandated by what's in that policy. If they reset their password in Office 365 when they log in, then it's going to be the default Microsoft policy. And send me a message after this, and I'll send you a link to an article where I describe. I have all the settings for the default Microsoft. So with the B2B or B2C tenant, you cannot set complexity. There are other tenant types where you can, but in your tenant, you cannot set complexity. And in most of the tenants, there are regular commercial tenants, you cannot set the password complexity. You can set if they expire. There's only one policy, and Microsoft controls the complexity. If you're hybrid, then the on-prem complexity will win, but only when the user is resetting their password on-prem, right? So, but we're coming up at time. If you have additional questions, I know there were two questions that were in the live stream, but I didn't answer. Please don't get upset. We're just running out of time. I'm trying to keep it under an hour and a half, and I have information to answer your questions. I'd rather send you like a link to a document or an article rather than talk about it here. So I noted the two questions that were asked. Please reach out to me directly, and I'll send you the information that you're looking for. Thanks to everyone who was in the Teams webinar today. I really appreciate your coming, and thanks to those who were in the live stream. I appreciate you coming as well, and there will be more webinars to follow. Thank you, and see you in the next one.